introductions this morning? Seeing none, we'll move on. We're going to open up this morning with a hearing on HCR 5001. And to give us an introduction on that, Mike will bring us up to speed.
Mike Heim with the Revisor of Statutes Office. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is a concurrent resolution making application to Congress of the United States for a limited national convention for the exclusive purpose of proposing an amendment establishing term limits for members of Congress. So there's a number of whereases, but the bottom line is it proposes a constitutional convention for the limited purpose of term limits for Congress.
Committee, any questions? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you, Mike. First up to talk, Representative Bill Sutton. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I didn't realize I was going to be the before. I guess there was an explanation of it a little bit there, so maybe we can get the ball rolling with that. Come before you in favor, certainly, of the calling an Article 5 convention for the purposes of term limits for Congress. This is an interesting one. Okay, first off, for those of you who aren't familiar with Article 5, it's in the Constitution. Right now, the federal government, the Congress, has the opportunity, has the ability at any given time to propose an amendment. That amendment then has to go through the process. You need the 3/4 of the states to approve and ratify before it ever goes into effect. At the original drafting of the Constitution, when this came about, I was much younger then, but I was there. There was discussion. Thanks for picking up on that one. I appreciate that. But they had drafted this part, that said that this is how we make changes to the Constitution. We know that this is going to have to be able to be changed as the world progresses, as our country grows and moves forward. We don't know what we're going to have to plan for, so we have to put an apparatus in place. And they did that and made Congress able to prepare amendments to the Constitution. And then at the last minute, somebody said, if we're going to let the legislators do that, do you think maybe the people being governed should also have that authority? Just, on the off chance that perhaps the federal government got out of control and didn't want to rein itself in, do you think maybe somebody else should have a little say in this process? And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And so the states also were given the ability to propose amendments to the Constitution. It was a no-brainer at the time, passed unanimously, and off we went. Now, moving forward, the odd thing has happened, and that is that the federal government's a little bit out of control. Serving in the legislature was never meant to be a career. We were a citizen legislature, and I know, Representative, we've been here a long time. But in Kansas, we live in our districts. And this is for every state. State legislators live in their districts. They go to Walmart and the grocery store, and if there's a problem with the way they're legislating, they're booted, and we see that every 2 years. You see what the turnover is in Congress? Now, this has a lot more to do with money than it does with them not being a part of their community, but the two go hand in hand on this. And that's really what we're looking at here. Now, personally, I would love for a convention to actually be called. All right, I think that would be phenomenal because I can math, you see, and the threat of a runaway convention is silly. But the funny part on this is that that's never going to happen. We have historical precedent in a couple of amendments that shows no matter what we do as states, it's going to be Congress proposing the amendment. And here's why. Well, first off, look at the 17th Amendment. Wasn't a great idea, but that one was one that I still think we should undo that one too while we're at it. But that one was brought about because the states were forming an Article 5 convention. They were signing on to change the structure of the Senate. They couldn't grandfather in folks, and so, or the states wouldn't grandfather in folks, and so the U.S. government said, let us handle this one, all right? So they drafted their own amendment, and that became the 17th Amendment. The 22nd was the same way when we implemented term limits on the president. You'll notice that in the 22nd Amendment, it doesn't apply to people who are currently in office. So in that case, it was Truman. Again, I was younger then, but still there. It was Truman at that time who wasn't going to be bound by the two-term limit for presidents. That's exactly what we'll be up against here. We get a good following. You get, I don't know, I think I said in my written testimony 30 or 32, but really we hit the mid-20s on states that have signed on to an Article 5 convention for term limits. There's going to be some bullets sweated in D.C. And they're going to be looking around going, okay, maybe we'd better get on the ball with this, because if the states draft this amendment, it's not going to grandfather in any of us. Right? Speaking as a senator here, not as a state representative. It's not going to include any of us. So we'd better draft something ourselves that'll protect our jobs while we can, so that we can then move forward and keep our jobs, but do the will of the people and institute term limits that they're obviously rather interested in achieving. So anyway, that's what I'm calling for. I want us to join the team. I don't expect that there will ever be a convention, but I'm very excited at the prospect. I think that it would be awesome if we got to draft that amendment rather than the folks who are rather entrenched. But nonetheless, I urge support of HCR 5001, and I'll stand for questions if it's ever appropriate.
Committee, any questions for Chairman Sutton? Oh my, you got off easy. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. Next up, we have Shanna Chambly. Welcome to committee. Welcome back to committee.
Good morning, Chairman Kessler and members of the committee. I've spoken with many of you here. I'm Shanna Chambly. I'm the Regional Director with U.S. Term Limits. Representative Sutton hit on all of the points that I normally would hit on that. I would like to reiterate that our goal in this is getting term limits on Congress. And we did a poll last month here in Kansas. 79% of Kansans that were polled between January 6th and 7th of this year asked the specific question about this resolution, want to see this happen. And that's across party lines. This is the highest polling nonpartisan issue in the country. Pew Research polling, they did a poll that showed that 87% of American voters want to see this happen, and that polled at 89% of Republicans and 86% of Democrats. This is a unifying issue, is something that will bring about the opportunity to have free and fair elections in our country. And this is something that your constituents are asking you to do. And we do this, we bring ours forward. Now, I, like Representative Sutton, would not mind seeing a convention. I know that that's not going to happen in this case. We also do the other route. I work diligently myself in U.S. Congress with Ted Cruz and Ralph Norman, who run our bill there. And we have hopes of that someday passing. We need you to join the other states that would put the pressure on them and encourage that to happen. We've currently passed 9 states with our single topic resolution. And so I'd like to make Kansas the 10th. We are up in committee in South Dakota right now today as well, probably currently as I speak. And so you can be in the race with them of who could be the 10th. But Kansas has the high bar to reach of reaching a 2/3 majority, much like we have to reach a 2/3 majority to pass this through Congress. So this has been a challenge of mine. I've really enjoyed Kansas, and I would appreciate your yay vote and bringing this to the floor, and I'll continue speaking with each of you and gaining the vote that we need on the floor, and I will stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think the most telling statistic about this, and like you say, the poll numbers are off the charts high, but I believe it's U.S. term limits that tracks every time a term limit issue comes up somewhere in the country. I mean, it could be a local city commission, or it could be, you know, a state wanting to term limit its representatives or whatever. And 98% of the time, the term limit passes. Are you familiar with that survey?
I am not, that is not my arena that I work in. I work primarily in working in state legislatures doing this and in DC. But yes, our organization and team members of ours do tracking on that. And it is overwhelmingly when there is the opportunity, like such as states that have ballot initiatives where they have the ability for the people to vote, overwhelmingly every time the people vote for term limits.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation and your efforts in this regard, which I generally support. I know that either there was or still is litigation in Kansas over whether or not it's required that we have a simple majority or supermajorities. Where does that stand?
Our organization, nor myself personally, are not party to that case. There is another Article 5 organization, which would be Convention of States by name, that is party to that case. I'm not privy to the details of how that is going, but our goal is to meet your constitutional 2/3 majority that is currently required.
Thank you.
Representative Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks for being here again to visit us today. What's your ideal term limit?
Are you asking that from a personal standpoint or an organizational standpoint?
All of the above.
Okay, well, as an organization, through the approach that we're doing now and with the resolution before you that you have the opportunity to vote on, there are no set terms, and our stance is that we want the states to come together to make that decision. So that would be incumbent upon you and the others who come together and give your commissions to your delegates if there were to be a convention. The one that we run in Congress calls for 3 House terms and 2 Senate terms. So that would be 6 years in the House, 12 years in the Senate. It does not have language that would prevent crossover from one chamber to the other if one were to do so. That was what was the highest polling, and that's what we went with there. So if that one passes, that would be it. Through this, we want the states to have the deliberative authority to make their own decisions.
Okay, and the next question, of the 9 states that are already in favor of this, are the legislatures term limited?
In the state of Louisiana, they are. In the other states that we have passed, they're not.
Would you favor legislatures also, if we're going to promote that idea forward to the U.S. Congress, that we abide by those rules?
That is not something that we currently work on, with the exception of if there are states that have already established term limits by the will of the people, most of those states being by ballot initiatives. Then if those states seek to change those, then we seek to protect what the people had asked for, but we do not seek to go forward in term limiting any future state legislatures.
Just one more one. The people that you polled in Kansas, were they in favor of not only the U.S. United States Congress term limits, What about state term limits?
We did not pose that question in our poll.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the esteemed representative in his testimony said that the chances of a runaway convention are very slim. I would agree with that. But Article 5 of the Constitution does say that a convention would be called for amendments, plural. So is it possible that an amendment or that a convention can be called for an exclusive use, and once in the convention, it becomes open up for the entire Constitution, save for those that are stated in the Constitution as unamendable, that anything then can be amended, regardless of what the resolution calls for exclusively for term limits?
Representative, no, I do not believe so. And I base that on the fact that currently we have over 400 outstanding applications across spanning more than 40 states at this moment asking for an Article 5 convention on various topics. There has not been one called because there have not been 34 topics that matched in order to be able to call that convention. Yes, it is a plural in there because there could be the potential, such as the other convention effort that does ask for multiple amendments in their resolution. If there were to be a resolution that asked for multiple amendments, such as that of the Convention of States, then sure, there could be multiple amendments proposed in that convention. Every state will send their own commissioned delegates to any future convention, and the commissioned delegates will abide by that. There are at least 7 states that impose felony charges on a commissioned delegate who went outside the scope of their commission. So, and then you have the safeguards and rails in place of the fact that 38 states have to ratify whatever comes out of a convention. If there were to be one, they opened it up and they went rogue, then that means that 38 states, both chambers in 38 states, would have to then agree that it was okay that their commission delegates had then gone rogue and violated their commissions. It would only take one chamber in 13 states to then reject a rogue amendment. So I believe that the safeguards are in place for any future convention for it not to run away.
I appreciate that answer, and I know that we're talking internally about a state level safeguard for that, but that still is a state level, and those are individual states, as opposed to still the question of nationally, once a convention is called, whether it opens it up to the entire Constitution. I appreciate your viewpoint. I would appreciate the opponents to find out what their stance is on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Corbett. Representative Wagner.
Thank you. Ms. Champley, you know, we had the bill, what, 2 years ago? I think it came to this committee, you know, it passed through the House as far as on a majority vote, but that included term limits. It had term limits, I think balanced budget, I think maybe federal government overreach or something. And so that prior vote, as far as your organization, because I think there's like 17 states, 20 states that have passed that, does that not count toward this, or is this strictly, I mean, by your understanding, you're going to have to go through all those states and get this one passed, you know, to have the convention?
To answer your question, we do actively work to pass all of the states that organization has also passed. There are legal opinions that we could possibly aggregate with the one topic which matches in theirs, because they do include term limits, but that of course would take legal decisions, court cases to decide, and that's not something that we feel like we should spend resources on, and we believe that we should stick with the spirit of the framers. In Federalist 85, Hamilton wrote that the intent of the framers was to bring forth topics singly through this approach, and so we believe in the single topic approach, and we believe in that, you know, we work to pass all of the states legitimately in our single topic.
And not seeing any others. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Committee not seeing any written or any neutral. We do have, starting with opponents, and up to talk to us today is John Axtell. John, welcome back to committee.
Thank you. Honorable Chair and Committee, I'm John Axtell. I'm from Wichita, and I'm the volunteer coordinator for Kansas Campaign for Liberty. I oppose HCR 5001 for several reasons. But the first reason is that a term limits amendment will not clean up Washington, D.C. You see, the problem in D.C. is not the lack of term limits. It's more than just bad elected officials who have been around D.C. too long. Even after these folks leave D.C., they're going to leave behind the powerful lobbyists, the donors who have learned to get from those elected officials exactly what they want, and office staff who have jobs and careers that they want to protect, and others in their circle. So when the bad legislator is termed out or leaves for some reason, the newly elected legislator then arrives in Washington, D.C., and these powerful people surrounding the old legislator, they're not just going to go home and die. They're going to be there, and they're going to be as hungry and clever as ever, and they'll do all they can to teach the new legislator to behave in the way they got the old legislator to behave. So we've all seen exactly how this works. How many candidates have you seen who sign a petition or a survey saying, I will never vote for an unbalanced budget? But then their first time in Congress, they vote for an unbalanced budget. Well, these people are told by the establishment that you can get away with this when you go back home to your districts. All you have to say is the magic words, it would have been a whole lot worse if it would have been the other guy. We know about that. That happens all the time. Furthermore, term limits just won't simply magically change demographics, okay? Nancy Pelosi's district, if she is term limited out, I hear she's retiring, is that right? Her district in San Francisco is going to elect another Nancy Pelosi. We won't see Thomas Jefferson elected in her district anytime soon, okay? And the real solution here is simple, but it's difficult. It's simple to talk about because it's establishing grassroots movements that hold elected officials accountable. And that's a difficult thing to do, I admit that. But the second reason that I oppose this is because of what we've already talked about, and that is the delegates cannot be constrained, the convention cannot be constrained by the people of Kansas. We already know about the lawsuit. Yes, the lawsuit is a lawsuit by two Kansas legislators, essentially against the Kansas Constitution's 2/3 supermajority requirement for passing this kind of resolution. We know about the 1975 Dyer versus Blair case, which calls the state constitution of Illinois only precatory or a wish and having no legal authority. That's in the eyes of the federal court, right? Okay, so we know that also they said that it's because the legislature is working under Article 5 that they have this opportunity to call their state constitution precatory. They say they're working in a federal process. Well, the delegates are also working in a federal process when they're attending the convention. We've been through this before. The delegates will have the same legal authority in federal court to ignore the state constitution and state statutes, which include delegate bills that tell them how they are to behave. So we know that the delegates cannot be constrained, but if that's not enough evidence that a convention won't go as planned or as hoped, please consider what members of the 118th Congress have said or have indicated could happen in HCR 24, House Concurrent Resolution 24, which would have called a convention under Article 5. In the words of the resolution, they say that a convention will be called as long as they can count, quote, applications for a convention to propose amendments from at least 2/3 of the states on any national issues, plus the single issue of fiscal responsibility. They would have called the convention had this passed, and it's clear that the applications being considered under this resolution and towards the tally of achieving the 34 are not required to have precisely identical language to be added together to achieve this 34 number. So if there is not precise control over the applications and the language in the applications, there can be no precise control over the topics covered in the convention. Furthermore, the ratification proposed in this resolution was by state delegate conventions, which bypassed the legislature, which is an important point. So in summary, term limits are actually very likely to make things worse, not better, in Washington, D.C. And we've seen through the recent events and in the Convention of 1787 as well, that delegates cannot be constrained, and the convention will likely not be conducted as we might hope. So I urge you to vote against HCR 5001. I thank you for your time, and I would be glad to stand for questions.
Committee, any questions for John? Oh, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've come up here several times to talk about this. What are your credentials?
I'm a citizen, and the law in this country is based on the idea of citizens having equal access and equal standing in the law. So I am not an attorney. I was an engineer and a teacher, both.
Sure.
Okay?
I mean, I don't have any credentials either.
So my credentials are, I'm a citizen.
Okay, and so then, regardless of what you think about it, would you agree that the majority of the people in this country want term limits?
I think that I'm not going to question those polls, but I would suggest that the legislature would want to consider a higher standard, and that's what would really work. Sadly, we saw the state of Kansas give what I felt was a very unfortunate vote on the value them both amendment. And I would certainly hope that this legislature would still be pro-life.
Sure.
In spite of that.
But you would concede, despite your personal misgivings, this is something that has widespread popular support.
I would say that if the question were, should there be term limits, and you have 80 or so percent, as has been attested, yes, I would concede that's probably true. I would also say that if they understand fully the implications of a convention under Article 5, I think that number would change radically. And in fact, I know it does, because I've gone into my neighborhood and I've collected 65 petition signatures against, just in my little neighborhood right around my house.
Sure.
Against the whole idea of this lawsuit.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
And not seeing any others. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you.
And I would like to point out to the committee, we do have 3 written opponents as well in your packets. And that'll wrap this up for this section. Moving on, I'm going to open up some discussion on HB 2028. And Mike will give us a refresher on that.
House Bill 2028 deals with the Department of Wildlife and Parks and giving discounts to seniors and removing the expiration date for kids' lifetime combination licenses and so on. There was this bill contains a reviver provision. Apparently, the Wildlife and Parks missed the fact that that there was a sunset on this, so this reestablishes the law during that period that it was sunsetted. And anyway, that's bottom line of what this does. There's some amendments.
Thank you for that. So just a kind of re-clarify. The seniors discounted lifetime hunting and fishing was sunsetted. That far as we can tell, might have been an oversight not to readdress that at the time that it sunsetted. So we're just going to open that provision up for, just take the sunset off. This is going to be allowed permanently, right? Is that correct? Okay. And then also, we currently have a youth hunting license for, like, I think it's under 5 or 6, then under 8 or 9, or in that range. And that is current law, which actually is set to sunset like in 2031 or 2032 or right around in there. And this will actually just remove that sunset as well, correct? Okay. Committee, any discussion? Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. As you can see, the senior license was kind of overlooked maybe because of 2 secretaries coming together or something, but they missed it. So last year, anybody that was 65 to 75 did not have the opportunity to buy this license. So we're just trying to establish that back again. All the fees are the same on both licenses. The youth license is from 0 to 7, and it had an expiration date of 2032. But I thought while we're in the chicken house here, let's just clean them both up. So if you get in a situation again where you've got more secretaries moving and people not watching, your constituents would still be able to buy a youth license or a senior license.
Committee, any other discussion? Not seeing any more discussion. Do I have a motion on the table? Representative Corbett?
I make a motion we pass this out.
Representative Schmo seconds. Committee, you've heard the motion. All members to accept the motion and pass this bill out, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. Ayes have it, motion passes. Next up, I'm going to open up discussion on HB 2372, which would be the Firefighters Memorial in Wichita, and Mike will give us a refresher on that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill would deal with the Firefighters Memorial and what it would sunset or basically change the who would be the responsible. It would create a new Kansas Fallen Firefighters Memorial Council that would include basically the same membership as the current Firefighters Memorial. And it would provide, instead of this memorial being on the Capitol grounds here in Topeka, that it would be placed at the Kansas Firefighters Museum in Wichita or in that area.
Committee, any questions for Mike? Oh, not seeing any. I'm going to start off the discussions with an amendment. We do have an amendment for this, and while that's being passed out. So I'll explain this amendment a little bit, why they're passing this out to you, but this just does just does a couple things. So the appointment to the board, it changes some of the appointments to the board. It just kind of, the original bill, the way it was crafted, actually the way it was copied, didn't include anybody from the Wichita area or the Firefighters Museum or the City Park Board that actually owns the land where this is going. So this actually changes some of the selection. It doesn't change the number of selection, it just changes some of the selection processes to include the a selection from the Firefighters Museum and from the Wichita Park Board and also from the State Funeral Assistance Team. And since it's not technically at the exact address of the same thing as the memorial, as the museum, we kind of just put in the statute, it's just adjacent to the museum. It's in the park, if you're familiar with that park down there. Any questions? Not seeing any. Do I have a motion?
Thank you, Chairman. I move that we accept the amendment on House Bill 2372.
Do we have a second? Representative McNorton. You've heard the motion. All in favor of the motion, say aye. All opposed, say no. That motion passes. Now we're back on the bill. Any other discussion? Representative Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 2372 be passed out favorably as amended.
Representative Miller has the second. Committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Motion passes. Moving right on down the line here. Next up, I'm going to open up discussion on HB 2378, and that's going to be the Squatters Act that we discussed, and Mike will give us a refresher on that.
What this bill does, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it provides that the owner of a dwelling unit or agent may request the removal of an unauthorized person from a dwelling unit by submitting an affidavit to the county sheriff. And the person that makes the affidavit basically says that a person is entered and remains unlawfully in the dwelling. They are not a holdover tenant. They're not a immediate family member and so on. And it requires the sheriff to give notice after the person that made the affidavit gives notice to the whoever the squatter is. It provides for delivery of the notice by the sheriff, either by hand delivery or by posting on the entrance. It provides the sheriff can charge a fee. It provides that the sheriff and the political subdivision would not be liable for any act or omission. And it does give the person that's the squatter a cause of action if they're wrongfully removed. So there are some amendments proposed.
Thank you, Mike. To start off the discussion, Representative Reisman.
I have an amendment.
So we had multiple submissions for amendments on this, and a lot of these suggestions were identical with a little bit of variation. So Reisman's amendment here kind of wrapped all of those all up into one. So we're going to do that one. As they're passing that out, I believe Kyle will explain that a little bit.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So essentially, what this proposed amendment does is three things. One, it implements the suggested changes received in testimony from the Sheriff's Association. It also adds in a definition for immediate family member. It expands the definition of dwelling unit to include commercial property and mobile homes. And it also changes all the references from county sheriff's office to law enforcement agencies. And so you can see those changes starting to be implemented on page 1. One of the suggested changes had been to say on page 1, line 20, that the affidavit would need to be notarized. So that language would be added. You'll see that the current definitions that started on the bottom of page 1 have been stricken, but those existing definitions were simply just moved and consolidated to the bottom of page 2 to create a single definition section. Similarly, you'll see a bubble on page 1 that says, an affiant who knowingly provides a false affidavit to law enforcement shall be charged with a Class A non-person misdemeanor. That language was already in the bill, but in a different section. It was simply moved as requested by testimony. You can see those added definitions being added, the new definitions being added to the bottom of page 2. Immediate family member will be expanded to say means spouse, child, grandchild of any degree, parent, mother-in-law, father-in-law, grandparent of any degree, brother, brother-in-law, sister, sister-in-law, half-brother, half-sister, uncle, aunt, nephew, or niece, whether biological, step, or adoptive. And then the law enforcement agency is simply going off of a current definition we have in law that would encompass both a county sheriff's office and local police officers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. Committee, any discussion on that? Any questions for Kyle? Oh, Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you explain the impact of the explanation of immediate family member? Is that change who is ever considered a squatter, or is that just some background information for the law?
One moment, I'll look up the reference to that language in the current bill. So currently that language is used on page 1 of the bill in line 30, where it states that one of the elements of someone who would be a squatter is that they are an unauthorized person who is not an immediate family member of the property owner, and that had not been previously defined.
Any other discussion on the amendment? Mike?
I think what the immediate family member definition, what's been chosen is a very broad definition. There's some definitions in the statute. There's at least 3 different versions of what an immediate family member is. If you don't want all those folks as part of the immediate family, we can pare it down.
So I remember the question was brought up, I believe, by Representative Mosley last time when we were talking about family member. What is a family member? So of the 3 different definitions, the first one being simple, I think it's mother, father, son. I think that's about it on the first definition. This is the broader of the 3, which includes the broadest segment of what a family member is. So any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative, would you like to close?
I close.
Do we have a second? Representative Howell with a second. Committee, you've heard the motion on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Motion passes. We're back on the bill. Is there more discussion on the bill? Seeing none, do I have Representative Sanders?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee passes House Bill 2378 favorably.
Do we have a?
As amended.
As amended. Do we have a
Thank you.
second? Representative Ward. Committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. Motion passes. Moving on to the final act or chapter today, I'm going to open up discussion on HB 2331, and Kyle will give us a explanation of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2331 would authorize the disposition of the unclaimed remains of deceased persons by district coroners, and it would provide exemptions from liability for such actions.
Thank you for that. Committee, any questions? Okay, seeing none. I'll just make a comment. I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my head around Sedgwick County. And what was that number? Was it 8,000? 8,000 or 5,000 that they've had since like 2008 or something like that. It's like, wow, okay. But any other discussion on the Representative Howell?
I would just, thank you, Chair. I would just also like to add that even just last night, I found out that there's a nonprofit that helps family that loses babies, like through miscarriages or stillbirths or things like that. And they have actually been helping Sedgwick County by buying unclaimed babies. And they also have a large number of cremated babies that they don't have a way to bury them either, that they are storing also. So there's even more, and some of them are more than 10 years old. So this is, there's even more. So it's quite the situation.
Committee, any other discussion? Do we have a motion on the table? Representative Schmo.
Thank you, Chairman. I move that we pass HB 2331 favorably.
Is there a second? Representative Ward seconds it. Committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. Motion passes. So I have just a couple of announcements to make. Once again, I want to thank you guys for being so patient with me yesterday. Yesterday was kind of a long day. So tomorrow will be, we're going to have discussion on the term limit bill that we just heard today. So we'll have a discussion on that tomorrow. And also we're going to open up and have a discussion on the CMB licensing bill from the ABC. We'll have that tomorrow too. The one thing we will not have tomorrow will be the HB 2384, and that was on the conveying of the land to the Shawnee tribe. That will be stricken from tomorrow, and we may readdress that in another week or so, but for tomorrow, that'll be stricken from the calendar. Any other questions or comments for the good of the body? Seeing none, thank you guys. We are adjourned.